so that we know who to contact or who's overseeing all this activity. Just for the sake of introductions, really. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure Richard can tell us that a number of the members of the team will be addressing us on the next issue, so we'll actually have a chance to speak to them through the committee. But I'll pass over to Richard.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Yeah, happy to confirm, as Leader has said, the team that are responsible for supporting the triple R functions are available and on the call. Obviously, I lead the team as Chief Officer. Our colleagues Mark Thompson, who is on the call, Lee Seaton, Annie Johnson, Sharon Davidson, Serena Dunlop, and Claire Aitken and Andy Reid also provide support in terms of the EU exit functions of the team. But I'm also happy through you, Leader, to issue a wee update to members afterwards, so you have that in writing. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I think that might be helpful. Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. I'm looking at 3.2 and I take that I set out in 6.1.6 of the scheme as follows. I take it that's this scheme of delegation that's being referred to there. But just recognising the two, I'm quite comfortable with the two. I would seek advice on perhaps a third remit for this committee, this subcommittee, and that would be to ensure that all government grants are drawn down to enable and enhance the local economy and to help businesses. That we keep our eye on that. Just this week, I had a request made of me, an inquiry rather, on how some authorities are paying this and yet others aren't, and all the rest. I think we've got to keep our eye on government funding sources, and that we are trying to maximise that as much as possible. And we've already done a good job on that front, but it's part of it. I would hope that could be part of this delegation in reporting back.
Well, I'll hand over to Nick, but it would be my understanding that the delegations were agreed by full council, so I think any further delegations would have to be agreed by full council.
I just wonder why it's before us then, Chair, obviously either to endorse or agree, and I'm just putting that forward as a further remit.
I'm not disagreeing, it's an important issue actually, Councillor Scobie, but we're being asked to note it, we're not actually being asked to agree it. So I'll hand over to Nick anyway.
I bet you take it full council, Chair.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, you're quite right. The purpose of it's normal practice at the first meeting of a new subcommittee or new committee for the subcommittee to note its terms of reference given or delegations given it's the first meeting of the new body. I don't know whether and you're quite right, it's simply to note these delegations as approved at full council. It's not for the committee to vary them. If it were, that would have to be taken up through full council, but I don't know whether Richard wants to comment on the sort of roving remit to look at, to keep an eye on grants, etc., that are available, but it's not directly related to the delegations as they're drafted here before us.
Hello.
Sorry, Richard, did you want to say?
Just to provide Councillor Scobie and I hope the other members with some assurance, Leader, that the team are engaging on a weekly basis with colleagues to ensure that we're supporting all elements of the RRR programme, including the business grant programme through colleagues in economy and resources, and we'll continue to do that as proactively as we possibly can. Indeed, I think we can give some examples today of and some updates in that regard, which I hope will provide Councillor Scobie with some assurances in that area.
Councillor Scobie, you wanted to come back again?
Please, and thanks for letting me back in. I don't see this as a controversial issue, and I take on board what Richard has said, and would commend the team in their efforts and our own discretionary grants. Whereas the report says this is a delegation to response, renew and the recovery, and I would take that as the economy, building back businesses and so forth. And I think it's an avenue that we as a subcommittee, it's an element that I would hope we would keep an eye on, notwithstanding what Richard has said. And again, I would commend the work of the department in what they're doing to provide as much financial resources to businesses that have already suffered over the year. I would hope it's a simple matter. Whether it needs taken back to full council, I'm quite happy for it to do so.
I've noticed in the chat that Councillor Fairbairn has said there's a lot of interference on the call. I'm not hearing a lot of it, but maybe just to remind people to mute their microphones if it is interfering and making it difficult for people to hear what's being said. Well, Councillor Adam Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. I think that all councillors will agree that where there are opportunities, we want to take those up, but I would be quite reluctant to support a specific delegation on that. You know, this council receives millions of pounds in specific grants, and all, you know, from education to the economy to transport. It would be quite difficult to start differentiating that. And I think, to be honest, there's delegations in place at present to allow, you know, the Economy Resources Committee to, you know, disperse grants or to allocate grants that are specific for the economy or economic recovery. So I would be not too keen on supporting that, but of course there may be some opportunities that, you know, as part of the sort of moving feast that this committee might want to discuss and, you know, sort of generate ideas here for economic recovery, for community recovery, or anything coming out of the COVID pandemic.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Leader. I'm actually looking at the delegations as we speak. The third bullet point, the second bullet point, the last part is to lead and contribute to national and regional policy and actions. That surely covers what Wally's talking about here.
Thanks. I think it was more of a monitoring. Councillor Scobie was suggesting that we had some sort of role in monitoring the.
Yeah, but that was quite clear in the discussions, Leader, at full council that would remain with the service committees.
Remains with the service committees. I think that was Councillor Wilson's point, that remains with the service committees. Okay, any other questions on this agenda item? Not seeing anybody, so we were just being asked to note, and as Nick said, that's normal at the first meeting of any committee or subcommittee that we note what our delegations are. So if we can,
I'm quite happy with what Andy Ferguson said, that, you know, in noting that to lead and contribute to the national regional policy and actions, that may cover it. Notwithstanding again that, as Adam has said, that's delegation has not been removed for service committees.
Okay, if we could move on to agenda item 4. This is a detailed report which aligns with the delegations of the subcommittee and provides members with information in regard to the ongoing response and restart activity, together with details of the initial approaches to the renewal of services and the recovery of our region. Given the wide range of areas covered in the report, I intend to structure our debate as follows. The RRR team will provide a short update in regard to the current COVID data, together with an update on resilience partnership response activity, after which I will invite member questions. We will then move to restart activity, adopting the same approach, and finally to renewal and recovery, again followed by member questions and debate. So for the first part, Mark Thompson and Annie Johnson will update us on the current COVID data and the Resilience Partnership response activity, including community. Is it Mark first? Yeah, other Mark.
Thank you, Leader. Good afternoon, everybody. So case numbers and positivity rates in Dumfries and Galloway have returned to very low levels after the significant peak that we faced in January this year. As an example of that, positivity rate has reduced from a high of 552 cases per 100,000 recorded on the 4th of January, which at that time was the highest in Scotland, down to last week 1.3 per 100,000. That's a significant reduction in a relatively short space of time. Last week's data highlighted 3 new positive cases in the region with 5 high-risk contacts, and the previous week there was 2 new cases and 3 high-risk contacts. So hopefully we are seeing a trend of generally low levels, and that will continue for the next period. The impacts of lockdown, our test and protect framework, and a very efficient local mass vaccination programme have undoubtedly all made significant contributions to this progress, and it's credit to health and social care workers and multi-agency responders, but also important to highlight the contribution our communities and the wider population have made in helping achieve this, and the many sacrifices they've made in the past few months. Scottish Government this week confirmed the relaxation of restrictions on the 26th of April, where we will move to level 3 and hopefully move to level 2 on the 17th of May, level 1 on the 7th of June, and level 0 towards late June, obviously subject to the prevailing conditions. And whilst this is a very, very positive position to be in, we just need to bear in mind the World Health Organization, for example, last week stressed the need to guard against complacency with regards to the virus. It is clear that it is still in circulation. We are still seeing some cases, and the risk of new variants remains, as is seen by the new Indian strain that we're seeing a lot of coverage of in the media. And our own local experience has shown that the position can change almost overnight, from very low numbers to significant numbers of positive cases, and then we will see the consequent pressures on the health and social care system. As we move out of restrictions and open society back up, there's no doubt we will see a level of increase in infection rates at times in the coming period. There are going to be increased opportunities for the virus to spread, and it's important for all responders, including the council, to be alert to this and to remain vigilant and ensure that we maintain the response structures in some form, as well as the mitigations, and be ready at all times to escalate where required. Our tried and tested test and protect arrangements and the related frameworks for providing support to those who need it will continue during this period, as well as the rollout of the vaccine and the various strands of testing available to the public. These are all going to be key elements for the next few weeks and months. Turning to our vaccination programme, Dumfries and Galloway continue to perform above expectations with regards to vaccination numbers. The figures compare very, very favourably with the national figures. As of the 18th of April, 70.9% of our eligible adult population had been given their first dose, compared to a Scottish average of 60.4%. And in terms of second dose, 37.1% of our adult population who are eligible have been given their second dose, compared to a Scottish average of 16.3%. Now, in terms of numbers, 89,119 people have been given their first dose, and 46,559 have been given their second dose. So that's a combined total of 135,678 doses. And I'm certainly pleased to highlight that in terms of our vulnerable priority group 9, 1 to 9, we have made significant inroads, particularly in that group in terms of second doses, and very high percentage uptake for second dose, right down to the 60 and above. and now we're actually starting to see significant inroads into second doses for those aged between 50 and 59. In addition to the ongoing programme, we have set up a special multi-agency subgroup to look at ensuring that everybody has equal access to the vaccination programme. There may be challenges, and it has been recognised nationally as a result of a particular vulnerability, cultural considerations, or as a result of financial circumstances. Some people may struggle to access their vaccination. So we are looking with third sector organisations, various cultural groups, and a range of partners to ensure that we can provide accessibility to the vaccine programme for all. The Council is fully engaged in both the planning and delivery of the programme, and will continue to do so for the duration, and engage with the NHS with regards to any future plans for COVID booster vaccinations as details of that become clear. Discussions are at an advanced stage with regards to the future delivery framework for vaccines for those under the age of 50 in the coming weeks, and it's hopeful that we will arrive at a stable model in the very near future, and we will be able to communicate that to elected members. Another key aspect of the work that we're doing is working with the NHS to ensure a wide range of communications have been issued to encourage people to participate in the programme. There are some good practice that we have seen locally in terms of the campaign about not leaving the job half done, which has been picked up as good practice nationally, and a number of other areas are starting to look at that style of messaging to punch out the need for the public to actually access their second dose. So, having a robust testing programme for both symptomatic members of the public and an asymptomatic community testing programme are key levers for us to be able to identify future cases before these become significant outbreaks, and provide a key support which underpins the transition from the response framework that we're operating in just now, and that transition to restart, renewal and recovery. So with the Chair's permission, I'll pass over to Annie, who will be able to provide a bit more of an update on the testing programme.
Thanks, Mark. Annie.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Leader. The Scottish Government testing strategy states that as we work to suppress the virus to as close to elimination as possible and keep it there, that we will actively seek out every possible case using all of the now advanced testing capabilities to their optimal potential, and that testing for COVID-19 is likely to become a permanent feature in our lives, although one whose form will continue to change and adapt as the pandemic and the virus itself does. In addition, given the strategic intent of the government's overall pandemic strategy is to support the resumption of life as close to normal as possible, testing will increasingly play a role in supporting the wider social and economic goals by further reducing transmission risks through active case finding, as Mark's mentioned, as we return to the variable levels of restrictions across Scotland. And therefore, the availability and participation in regular testing is one of the pillars on which the move back down the levels is premised. The Scottish Government confirmed on the 15th of February this year that the community testing programme proposal received from NHS Dumfries and Galloway and Dumfries and Galloway Council had been allocated up to £523,000 for the financial year 2021. That funding was transferred from Government to the NHS, and from there to Dumfries and Galloway Council, where a specific cost centre has been set up for the programme. The Government confirmed at that time that they were planning to continue the testing programme into 21-22 and expected additional funding to be made available for the first 2 quarters of this financial year. For Dumfries and Galloway, this was estimated at up to £1,776,000. The Dumfries and Galloway partnership bid proposed to provide static asymptomatic testing sites in every ward, offering access to testing 7 days per week, and that was to ensure that we were as accessible as possible to all of our communities. In addition to this, the bid included 4 mobile asymptomatic testing units. The first 4 phase 1 static sites opened in late February, and they were manned entirely at that time by military personnel. We had 28 soldiers directed to Dumfries and Galloway to provide that. This was later augmented by redirected council staff, and at the end of March, the Stranraer site was handed over fully to council staff, and they have been continuing to run that site since then. We also currently have 2 mobile testing units commissioned, which can be deployed in the event of an outbreak for targeted testing. And we've trialled taking those mobile sites to large employers to allow them to have their employees tested with some success. The original squadron who delivered the testing withdrew on the 5th of April, and a reduced personnel of 9 soldiers was provided. They remain in place at the moment, covering Annan, Dumfries and Castle Douglas. Those sites also have support from redirected council staff and from Scottish Fire and Rescue Service personnel. The remaining military support will withdraw on the 3rd of May. In the meantime, the council has run a recruitment programme for the ATS sites. The response to that has been really positive. We undertook over 100 interviews over the last week for the posts of site lead, site operative and testing operative, and sufficient staffing has been identified from that recruitment programme to run the 4 existing sites and to start to roll out the programme. These are currently 6-month temporary contracts, and many of the people that we interviewed and who've been successful had been made redundant as a result of the pandemic, and were really looking to give something back to their communities. In addition to that, Third Sector have identified and interviewed 30 volunteers across the region, and they will be ready to support as soon as we have the contracted staffing in place. To date, uptake of the testing programme has been relatively low. However, that is something that's reflected across Scotland, and it is anticipated that numbers will increase as restrictions lift. There was, I suppose, a bit of conflict initially in that the national message to stay at home seemed to be directly conflicting with the message to come out and be tested. Despite that low uptake, nationally statistics show that asymptomatic testing is having an impact, with around 3% of tests giving a positive result, and that's allowing us to identify and isolate those who are positive and to implement test and protect processes to make contact with those that they've been in contact with and ask them to isolate. As I mentioned earlier, targeted testing using mobile testing units was trialled in early April with some success, with the units going to the site of some large employers in the west of the region. Gentex, P&O and Lactalis were 3 of the organisations who participated, and they had the largest numbers of tests undertaken in any one day. So that's certainly something that we want to look into further. The programme is constantly evolving, however, and Scottish Government announced yesterday the rollout of what they're calling a universal offer from Monday the 26th of April, and that means that anyone will be able to order asymptomatic testing kits online. These are the same kits that are used by pupils and staff in schools. They will be delivered to their home, and that will enable them to test themselves twice a week, logging the results either online via a portal or by telephone. And Community Collect is a part of that universal offer, which will allow those who prefer it to collect their testing kits from our community testing sites. This evolving picture means that we are having to constantly review our proposals, and as part of that, we are currently this week looking at how we continue to deliver the static sites. We believe that providing access in every ward is the right thing to do. It might be that rather than offering access 7 days a week, that's reduced, but we intend very much to ensure that access is available across the region. Scottish Government have also made it very clear that they wish us to continue to have the static asymptomatic testing site provision, and the benefits to that are the ability to provide wraparound support for those who need to isolate if they need isolation support, or to help those who are vulnerable or anxious about taking the test or about having to read the results themselves. So there is still a need for those sites to be in place. And finally, I think in terms of uptake, communication really is key to making sure that communities take up the testing offer. We do have a communications campaign at the moment, which includes social media. Local radio will be coming, and also advertising on the back of buses locally across the region. There is also a national campaign being developed to tie in with the launch of the universal offer, and we hope that all of that together will start to see people taking up the offer of testing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark and Annie. Can I invite members' questions to Mark and Annie, please? Not seeing anybody so far. Can I just, as I think many of us elected members have had our vaccinations now, but just to myself included, so just to endorse what Mark has said about the efficiency of the process. I think we're doing extremely well here in Dumfries and Galloway, and I think anybody who's been there and had the vaccinations, could testify how efficiently it's all being done. So I've got Councillor Maitland and Councillor Scobie wishing to speak. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you very much indeed, Mark and Annie. That was extremely comprehensive and helpful. My only question is about the, I think, possible confusion that still exists in people's minds about who should be tested. I mean, I don't know how you reach the elderly, people who are normally at home, people who've been shielding. What are they supposed to do? And I'm just a little concerned about the confusion that exists about how they should do it and where they should do it.
Hi, sorry. I think that's something that it's something that's talked about nationally quite often, and there is some discussion at the moment. I think there's confusion about where the difference between testing if you have symptoms and testing if you don't have symptoms, and the fact that those are two very distinct places, it does cause confusion for people. So there's some discussion at the moment between Scottish Government and health boards about whether those two can be brought together in one location. There's obviously a bit of wariness from clinicians about the potential of mixing the people who have got symptoms with those who don't. I think communication is absolutely key to that, and any national communication strategy that comes out will be very gratefully received, I think, by local authorities, because we're all trying very much to get that message out there. I think we can start to go and talk to more people, community councils, and try and spread the word ourselves as well. But I think a really clear communication campaign is what's absolutely necessary there.
And I think just to follow on from that as well, the Scottish Government's announced offer of the universal offer for testing and the ability to register to receive tests at your home reflects some of the accessibility issues that some people across Scotland have been facing in that regard.
Thanks. Jane, do you want to come back?
No, that's absolutely fine. I've just made the point I needed to make.
Thanks. Councillor Scobie.
Thanks, Chair. Really, two things. Firstly, I want to place on record our thanks from the Socialist Group to Mark, Richard and Annie in keeping us up to date with the figures and the effect of COVID. So, that has really been helpful for us in Stranraer. Particularly Mark and Annie, because there have been people who have slipped through the net, and with the help of Mark and Annie, these people have been caught and a vaccination provided, or at least a vaccination date provided, which the folk really appreciated. So they've been doing sterling work, the three officers, and as I say, I would just want to place on record our thanks for that. I just want to turn to 3.4.6, and a great deal of what Annie has been saying in terms of testing strategy to try and improve on capabilities and, you know, the increased rate, it being low. And again, I'm pleased to note that the 3 places were in Stranraer, and that's Lictallis, the helmet factory, and I think it was P&O were the 3. But I think there's opportunity here for us if we can get the support of the supermarkets. And I'm thinking that at least in Ward 1 and Ward 2, there is supermarkets, and people generally gravitate towards these supermarkets. So there may be an opportunity if we were to locate in there with the support of the supermarkets, and people are more apt to, when they're going shopping, to say, well, right, I'll just nip in there and get a test, because I think that is the answer to try and keep them top. And that was said last night on the national news, test and trace, that we need to keep tracking, we need to see that people are testing, and they did, as Annie says, they brought out that little one that people can go and get just as they're provided in the school, but it doesn't entirely say that you are either positive or not. So I would hope that through Richard's team that we're able to approach the supermarkets and seek their support, and as it says in 3.4.6, we will then be in control, or because there'll be employees of the council as to where we locate, but we do need the support of the supermarkets. So it's really just to try and see if we could get the support of the supermarkets so that this can be a little flow of people. I'm going shopping, I'll just nip in here. Just wonder what the thoughts are, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scobie. We can absolutely look at that, and we'll take that through the working group associated with the asymptomatic testing programme, and we will look to actively engage with supermarket providers across the region. I think it's actually an excellent and valid suggestion for future rollout of that programme.
Thanks, Mark.
I think it's a good idea too, because actually some of the statistics suggest that more infections take place in supermarkets than do, for example, in hospitality. So it's obviously, you know, because of the numbers, not because supermarkets are particularly unhygienic, but because so many people go through them, and you know, so obviously it's a good suggestion. Now, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Leader, for letting me in. It was coming back to Jane's point actually about getting the message out to older people, and it's a notoriously difficult group of the community to reach at times. As the older people's champion, I'm happy to get involved with Annie and the team there to get the message out. And just to give you an idea, I've already got a meeting in my diary for early next week actually, with the third sector, so that we can get messages out about the role of the older people's champion to a lot of community groups across the region, several hundreds in fact, through them. And also AIDS Scotland have been very involved, and they've got a database of heading towards a couple of hundred organisations who are signed up to their advice networks. So I'm happy to get involved in that, and I'm at Annie's disposal if she wants to use me. But I think this is one of these occasions where once duplication isn't an issue. The more times we get the message out, the more it's heard and it's understood. So I'm happy to help Annie. As always, with the old team back in operation, eh? Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. That would be really, really helpful. I think actually, in word of mouth is of particular importance in this aspect, because people are able to almost provide reassurance as well as a bit more detail about the process. So I would definitely, I'll get in touch with you because that would be really helpful.
Thanks. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Leader. Just on testing, and I think if we remember back to last year, when the message changed from stay at home, which was a very clear instruction, to We'll keep washing your hands, stay away from other people, but you can travel and you can do this, but you can't do that. That's obviously much more confusing. I can understand why there has been so much confusing messages over the testing, particularly as we're part of a pilot project. So hopefully from Monday, that will make it a bit simpler, more straightforward for the general public. One thing I'm quite interested to know is obviously as we start to come out of restrictions, and as some bigger venues with increased capacity start to open back up, it's even more important that asymptomatic testing is carried out as much as possible. So what are we, and if we think of some of the biggest employers, and I'm pleased to hear that we're already going out to some of the bigger employers, and I hope that continues. But of course, just thinking of the NHS and ourselves, considerably large workforce, what sort of messages are we going to be putting out to support and to encourage that big group of staff, good 10, 15,000 across the region combined, and also think as well, how can we make it easier? I appreciate that the mobile testing units at this time that there's plans for those, but I'm thinking particularly for our waste guys and girls, change of shift. Is there a possibility of making that easier? Thinking of our number of bus drivers at some of the bigger depots, is there a sort of is there something we could be doing first thing in the morning to get out to those as they start their shift, just to make it as easy as possible and to encourage as many people as possible. But I would imagine that from Monday, when the message will be probably a lot simpler, but also as people start to move around more, they'll probably feel more of a need, and for many people they'll feel a public duty to actually go and take up that test if they are going to be in a coffee shop one day, in a pub the next day, in the cinema the day after.
Thank you. I think that targeted approach is absolutely what we need to be looking at doing. We are working with HR to get a message out that we will allow staff to be tested in work time, and that provision of course they could take up the universal offer and have tests delivered to their home if that's what they so choose, but this ability for us to have a testing site in every ward means that it shouldn't be a huge drain on the working day to allow staff to go out and do that. However, there are some members of staff for whom, because of the job that they do, that wouldn't be possible, and certainly that's where the mobile targeting does come into place. And the intention is that when we get this staffing cohort in place, we can be much more planned in that targeted provision, because the testing should be done on a regular basis, so it needs to be on a rota basis. However, Scottish Government have been quite clear that they're flexible in the terms of the funding, because it's a constantly evolving picture. If we were to find that the 4 mobile testing units weren't sufficient, I think that we could go back. There is that flexibility to allow us to go back and request additional funding for more mobile testing units if that's what works best, and that will be considered on an evidential basis. And coming back to Councillor Scobie's point about positioning in supermarkets, I think that again comes back to that targeted approach. It makes much more sense, because people may not be likely to leave the house just to go and get a test, but if they're out doing something else and it's within easy reach, then that's something that they might be more likely to take up.
Thanks. If there's no other questions, unless you want to come back, Adam.
That'd be so sorry. My device seems to be about a couple of seconds behind. But I think and this is it'll sound funny, but it's not meant to be a funny point. But I'm just thinking, as we get closer to the end of June, to start of July, over summer, as more and more things open back up. I think Willie made a good point about actually the number of people who do their shopping, but as maybe like the cinemas open back up, as hospitality opens back up, on a sort of Friday afternoon, Friday evening, being in some of our bigger town centres before people head to the pub, just to encourage as many people to make it as as easy as possible for people to go and get a test and offer that opportunity. You know, I think that flexibility is really good.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. And I think expanding on that, through the Safety Advisory Group process that will be associated with planning for any major events we see later in the year, should that come to fruition as well, that this is an area that we will be able to discuss with events organisers as well, if we actually get to the chance where we see some of our larger music events or other sporting and cultural events as well. So we're more than happy to actually look at that in more detail.
Thanks. Thanks. Wanting to speak, so if there are no more questions, we'll move on to restart activity and receive an update from Lee Seaton, who will focus on the recent lifting of restrictions and the reopening of the region. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So we're aware from the recent government announcement that Level 3 will apply to all Scottish local authorities from Monday the 26th, and inevitably this will see a significant increase in local resident footfall across the region as we start to reintroduce a number of our services that have been closed during the recent months. So, for example, within our local authority, our leisure facilities will begin to reopen from Monday the 26th. Gyms, swimming pools for individual exercise programmes will be available. Pre-booking requirements, normal controls that applied when we last reopened will remain. This will be on a phased basis because other aspects of leisure will be introduced in terms of group fitness, lessons and coaching programmes from mid-May. In terms of our arts and museums facilities, our council is looking to reopen those to the public from Friday the 30th. Again, to control that customer flow, that will be done on an online booking basis, noting that some of our smallest facilities, for example, Castle St John, Old Bridge Museum in Dumfries, are not able to reopen at this time just due to the social distancing requirements within the facilities. And then in terms of our libraries and customer service centres, again, these are reopening from Monday the 26th on a walk-in basis for library activity, again with strict controls as per sectoral guidance. There will be appointments only for registrations. For example, the birth registrations, death registrations, however, will continue to be done remotely as per the national guidance, but appointments will be available for Blue Badge and NEC cards as well. The recommencing of those services will very much be done in the same way as they were previously. Any renewal and recovery and change of those services moving forward will be part of the future evaluation work that's ongoing just now, and I know Richard's going to come on and talk to the committee later in the meeting about that renewal and recovery process. I think, Chair, it'd be very useful as well just to touch on the wider reopening of the region and the increase in visitor footfall that we anticipate happening. We know from last Friday the 16th that there has been that travel ability across the whole of Scotland. We know that that's now widening across the whole of the UK from next week. We know that tourist accommodation can reopen self-catering from next week also. So in light of this and building on the learning from last year, when in the late summer and autumn period, there were a number of challenges across the whole of Scotland, and we were no different in relation to visitor management and the significant increase in visitors to our region in the midst of a pandemic and the challenges that brought. So our council is leading a visitor management planning group for the south of Scotland. We do that with Scottish Borders Council and Visit Scotland. A number of other partners are involved: police, fire, forestry and land Scotland, local council officers for key services, public conveniences, public realm, roads, etc., etc. Third sector D&G are part of that as well. Within the planning for this group, we're trying to collaborate our existing resources and secure new resources within our own organisation and with our partners. Some successes through our partners, for example, for members' benefit is Forestry and Land Scotland have secured 4 additional rangers to work in the Dumfries and Galloway area over the summer season. Forest and Land Scotland and Nature Scot have agreed to reintroduce a Stay the Night campaign within a number of their car park and visitor car park areas in order to try and direct off of small B and C class roads and verges motorhomes that seek to stay overnight that don't require to be in private sector accommodation. So we welcome that move that's happened. And we know that forward demand levels from Visit Scotland project that we are in for a very busy period, and that presents us with challenges, but it presents us with huge opportunities as well in terms of the future economy of our region. The report details some of the occupancy levels we're predicting. Caravan and camping, 50% occupancy from May, but rising up to between 80 and 100% for the summer season, June, July and August. And self-catering as well. We know that as we get through July onwards, we are looking at 100% occupancy based on the sectoral feedback that we've had thus far. So it's really pleasing that members agreed at the recent Finance Procurement Committee the additional investment of up to £900,000. Reminder in terms of where our planning group have agreed that would be invested in, as detailed in that previous report. So in terms of staffing resource, we're looking to enhance our street scene staffing model to respond to any situations across the summer season, as well as our normal summer maintenance. We are looking to increase our community safety officer presence across our region, as well as reprioritising the work of those staff during the summer to work in patrols across hotspot and key visitor areas, primarily in an educational and deterrent fashion. We're working with Visit Scotland and Nature Scot to get additional information and outdoor access code, encouraging additional training so they can engage with the public to promote that responsible tourist behaviour. We are also seeking that additional resource at a ward level that we can work with our local communities in terms of the support that they best need. So we've got agreed funding to look at additional ward support officers that will work with our existing ward officers in that engagement and response activity across the summer and beyond. And in addition, temporary infrastructure where we're required to put that in consultation with our communities. Now that includes additional waste facilities in hotspot areas, that includes where required additional temporary toilet infrastructure and/or our work with the communities where we maybe don't need to put temporary toilet infrastructure in, but instead work with our community organisations to support and fund them and resource them to open up community buildings that could provide that offer to our visitors as they come to our area. In terms of the engagement with the community, I'll just finish with an update on a very positive meeting that took place yesterday, last night, in fact, where we had 55 community organisations present via a virtual Teams meeting, hosted by our council, but supported by third sector D&G and Visit Scotland. We gave a bit of a national context in terms of visitor management approach in Scotland, but focused on our local planning today and some of the measures that I've just touched on and the welcome news of the up to 900k investment. What we sought to get from the community organisations present last night, as I say, there were over 55 there, was for them to hear where we were to date within our planning, acknowledging that we need their input in terms of how we spend that resource and allocate that resource at a very local level. So we got feedback in some of their areas of greatest concern. For example, communication, signage, single point of contact and a visible presence were very, very paramount, as were toilets and waste. So we have committed moving forward from last night that our ward officers and the additional staff that are coming in are now going to embark on some immediate community conversations, local engagement, so we can agree where this resource best goes, we can look at the options that we've developed so far and agree to amend and adapt to fit that local need. The positive feedback from last night was that the evaluations that are starting to come in suggested that it was just under 90% of those attending found the evening worthwhile and engaging. So initial feedback was very positive. Chair, happy to take any questions on any of the specifics around that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. I've got Councillor Scobie.
Could I firstly seek clarification from you, Chair, because we seem to have gone from an update on the pandemic through to COVID pandemic restart update, and I thank Lee for that anyway, but we missed out the EU exit, so I take it we'll be coming back to those, and indeed the service updates and the last bit in terms of our position as a region. If I could get that clarification, then I'll move on to my question, Chair.
Well, I had been expecting somebody else to be speaking on those particular issues, but it wasn't on my notes, so I presume the person who was going to be speaking on them is not available. I wonder if Richard could maybe let us know.
I can return to it. It's just so I know I can return to it, because I've got questions on it.
Ask Richard Greaveson, because we had thought that Sharon was going to speak on something.
Well, Leader, yes, Sharon's actually on the call, so I can pick up any specific questions. More than happy that that happens, Leader, through you.
Yeah, we had originally discussed whether there would be a separate presentation on those parts, but
I'm happy to come back to it as long as I know I can come back to it and that we haven't jumped over it.
Is there going to be a presentation then on that part of the?
My questions really they don't need a presentation, but I'm happy to hear it.
No, that's just I just wanted clarification if there was to be, because it wasn't in my notes. But if we are supposed to be getting one.
No, Leader, with Sharon, as I say, is on the call. Happy to pick up questions. I can pick up with Councillor Scobie as well, specific to those issues.
Okay.
I'll come back to them, Chair, if you're.
That's fine.
Yeah, can I just ask on Lee's presentation, and that's under COVID pandemic restart updating. Thank Lee. I'm looking at a budget under 3.7.6, Lee, a budget of 240,000 that you alluded to, has been agreed to increase staff commitment across the street scheme delivery support for the summer activities. And I just ask if that ties in with 3.79, where there has been £100,000 has been agreed for temporary toilet facilities in popular locations. And I'm thinking back to 2020, particularly around Sandhead, Drummoa, Port Logan, and I have no doubt with staycation, we will start to see more and more mobile homes and wild tenting and so forth. And one of the big issues in 2020 for me in the ward was that there was not the toilet provision. And I just ask Lee if that is going to be anywhere near enough at 240,000, given the breadth of the region, and likewise in the 100,000 for the cleaning of these toilets and maintaining them on a daily basis. I think we may fall well short, given we're almost into it now. The season's starting up from end of April. That'll go right through to October.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So those two distinct amounts, Councillor Scobie, are entirely separate. The totality of the funding that we have for all the examples I gave is up to £900,000. From the community engagement session we had last night, it was clear that toilets was an issue that was coming up. However, what was also really clear was that one of the options is for us to put in place temporary infrastructure, and where that's agreed with the community, we are able to do that. We've got funding allocated to do it, and we have the ability to provide additional mobile cleaning in the same way that we've used additional mobile cleanings to support the pandemic during positive cases in schools, for example, where we've had the mobile cleaning teams going in. So that's all built into the costings that we have. However, what was a clear option for us to investigate quickly in our dialogue with communities from last night was that it may not always be that infrastructure that we physically put in place. It may be a financial payment, or it may be a resource that we give to community organisations who think that they have got a premise that is not normally available, that could be available, and indeed where there are businesses who may, for some kind of grant support as well, look at the ability to widen their availability of toilet provision to the wider community. But that would all have to be part of this engagement, and it's now happening very quickly through our ward officer team.
Could I come back, Chair?
Okay.
Yeah. Lee, thanks for that update. And I referred to the weekly meetings, and that was one of the points that I put to Richard, that we need to be getting out there. We need to be speaking to the community councils. We need to be gauging their response, whether they would welcome the mobile homes or not welcome them, and then there could be some restrictions put on certain areas. So I'm delighted to hear that you have carried that out, Lee. And there are other ways of dealing with this, in terms of there could be resources available, as you've identified, in village halls, in the businesses that could provide that. But it's to take away the indignity, you know, of people not having anywhere to go and just doing it on the side of the road, or within eye shot of residents and so forth. So again, I just wonder, you seem to be confident that £900,000 will cover that. I'm just worried about from May right through to October, whether indeed, or no doubt, I'm sure you'll come back if that fund is running short.
Yeah, very much, Chair. The whole process is under constant review. We're setting up locality hubs that will work on the 4-district basis in terms of overseeing how we deal with our response, and we've got that additional community resource coming in to support the ward officers, who will be having that local dialogue with businesses, with community organisations on a more constant basis than we've been able to do before. So if there was a need to review what we are currently providing, then that is what we would have to bring back to members.
Thanks, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much, Leader. I think Lee, in his very comprehensive answer to Willie there, has answered a lot of the things I was going to ask him. Just a couple of comments. One is, before I go into the meeting last night, the welcome that we offer travellers, and that's even within our own region and external, we need to get some very clear messaging out there that they're welcome, but they're welcome if they behave. And I've seen some of the road signs from Australia, and would make your hair stand on end, to be frank. But the message got across. You know, you're really welcome to come here, but if you're going to make a mess, don't bother, right? Because we don't need you, because your net benefit to us, the benefit to us is actually in negative rather than positive. So I think that'd be the first thing. And then the second thing, it'd be really interesting, Lee, if you could just give us a wee flavour of what the concerns were last night, because I believe it's been a very, very worthwhile operation, very well run, and the communication and the engagement was positive, is what I understood. But it would be really helpful if we could get just a wee picture of some of the main things that they weren't happy about, or concerns, maybe is a better way of putting it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ferguson. So in terms of comms, first of all, you're absolutely correct that it's vital we get comms, because comms was one of the significant issues that came out last night, and appeared more frequently in the feedback comments than even public toilets and litter. So first of all, we had Visit Scotland part of the session last night, presenting to the 55 community organisations, and whilst we'll obviously take our local approaches as well, they highlighted that beginning next week there is a national campaign for a responsible tourism initiative that will go across all 32 parts of the country. It'll be within national press as well as within local media campaigns. We have got our comms officer who sits part of our South of Scotland group. She's linked in with our Borders colleague and the Visit Scotland colleague in terms of developing our own local comms plan to enhance any activity that's available nationally. In terms of the feedback from last night, so I can certainly give a bit more of a summary as to what appeared on the screens with the interactive session. All attendees were asked to complete an online evaluation as well. So as at this morning, we had 29 of those back in. We'll start to receive more throughout this week, and we do intend to go back out to all the participants, and I'm very happy that that's appropriate that we share all of that feedback in more detail with elected members as well when we go back out with that to give you the full breakdown of what feedback we received. But we structured the evening over an initial temperature check to get a sort of keywords that people felt when they heard that visitors were coming back to our region. Anticipating that would be a mixed sort of response between the anxious and the excited and positive. So the words that were repeated most frequently were the words of excited, positive, enthusiastic. However, it was absolutely balanced, Councillor Ferguson, with the key words that came up on the other side were nervous, apprehensive, uncertain. But there was a leaning towards a positive response to that within last night. In terms of when we asked them to consider what actions need to be considered that they hadn't already heard being presented, the most common responses that we got within the interactive session were in relation to wild and or dirty camping. It was in relation to who the single point of contact should be. It was in relation to signage and communication. And whilst toilets and litter were referenced, they weren't referenced, as I perhaps anticipated, as frequently as those other issues that I've suggested there. And in terms of what else can we do to help our communities restart, the session where we had the interactive element with that, the following were the key areas that came up. Information and signage, absolutely critical. Visible presence of staff within hotspot areas. Support existing facilities and businesses, and that ties into what I was talking about in terms of the community organisations that have their existing community assets that they operate, but also where we have community businesses that we can maybe support around about toilets and or local restart. We also had waste uplift and recycling, and a fast and flexible response to issues. Now, that's part of what we are now taking forward with the ward officers and the 4 locality hubs that are absolutely critical in terms of how they oversee the planning that's happening in each local area. We continue, Councillor Ferguson, to have our South of Scotland regional strategic group, but we need 4 area-based local discussion points as well. And in addition to that, through our support DG mailbox, where inquiries continue to come into, we're identifying for those immediate responses who are the key people that will receive those responses in each of those areas. And indeed, I spoke with Chief Inspector Lee this morning about who the appropriate police people would be across shifts across our 4 localities. Thank you.
Leader, can I come in very quickly, because I see there's a couple of in.
Fiona Lees wanted to come in as well in response to your first question, so I'll invite Fiona to come in.
Okay, Fiona first, yeah.
Yeah, she was wanted to respond to your first question.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, first of all, members. Can I just advise that I took the opportunity to attend this meeting myself last night as well, and I was very impressed with the work of the team here, and in actual fact the reach both across the sectors and communities who were participating. It was a really productive hour. And in answer to members' questions, then I think members can take a great deal of assurance that the matters that were considered by the Finance and Transformation and Procurement Committee last week were indeed the matters that were reflected by your community. So you are on the money. I think the other point I would want to say is, you know, this is quite a significant resource that this council has made available. And we will be wanting to talk to our communities about what we're going to do and what our communities are going to do. And it was so good to see such a good response. But rest assured, we will have close oversight of the funding, over the spend on that funding, and indeed those items where colleagues were raising issues that were a little bit different to what we anticipated. So, you know, there was information round about messaging and also out of hours response. And I would certainly be wanting to reassure members that in matters regarding the budget and indeed the activities and forward action here, then this will be certainly within my sight and the oversight of the senior leadership team as well. So thank you very much, Chair. I trust that provides members with the assurance they're looking for.
Thanks. Councillor Ferguson, you wanted back in.
Yes, firstly, thank you, Fiona, for that. It's reassuring. And I think one of the things I was going to follow up with was, are we going to work with the community and not in opposition to it? I think that and I think you've just answered that question. My other one, though, is for Lee and the wider group. When Visit Scotland and them talk about putting it on a TV campaign, it tends to be on STV and not Border TV. Can we just make sure Border Television are going to cover it?
Thank you, Chair. I can.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Apologies, Chair. I think there may have been a delay. I was just explaining to Councillor Ferguson that the national campaign will be run through Channel 4 television.
Thanks. Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. I'm actually sort of echoing Councillor Scobie's point about how we've moved through the report that was in front of us, but obviously it's good to have these updates about the here and now, as it were. Just on Lee's presentation there, obviously we're sort of moving at a pace, and I know we've just barely agreed the delegation to hear about yesterday's activity sort of thing, but in terms of the recommendations that this subcommittee will be making, presumably to the likes of Communities Committee, in terms of what do we learn from last night's activity, how will members be able to scrutinise the responses that community groups made, for example, how should we allocate, monitor and sort of make sure that we're staying on the money, as it were. Is that something that members will actually see? I mean, beyond a verbal assurance, will we actually get to see the sort of feedback from that presented at the appropriate committee, is one question. And just while I'm on, Lee did mention the 4 Forestry and Land Scotland Rangers, I think, for Dumfries and Galloway. Do we need to bid into that, or is that something that we will sort of start to see as a result of the outdoor access forum that we as an authority sort of lead? And similarly, just on the sections earlier in the report, I think it would be helpful, this is at 3.6.3, and it would be helpful if members could get a clearer, maybe short briefing note just on the difference between a green port and a free port, because obviously if that's something that we're going to bid into, it'd be helpful to really know what we're asking for or what we're putting in for. And similarly, at 3.6.7 in the report, it does mention, I know we discussed it at the recent meeting about the levelling up and the community ownership funds, which we will operate, but can I just clarify, we're not going to be determining these funds, we just operate them on behalf of whoever determines them, is that right? So there's a few questions in there, Leader. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I think that's probably going back more to Mark to answer, to take those questions, Mark.
Chair, I wonder if I could possibly answer it. Fiona, your interim chief executive here. So there's a range of questions there, and a number of these properly sit within your other service committees. Councillor Thompson, good afternoon. Having not served in a community with a coastline before, then I have had to get myself up to speed regarding the differences between a free port and a green port, and we will certainly make sure that in the business going to your economy committee, then that wider information is available to members. And equally, the second question regarding the levelling up funds, then these matters were properly considered by the Finance and Procurement and Transformation Committee last week. In relation to community renewal, then yes, this council will be asked to indicate a shortlist and to put that forward to the relevant departments of the UK government, and to settle on a position in relation to levelling up. Chair, if it's helpful, I would be very happy to organise a briefing for members out with this committee to make sure members are well versed in all of this, because some of this is quite fast moving. So if that'd be helpful, happy to organise it.
Thanks, that sounds as if it would be useful. Stephen, are you content with the responses?
Yeah, that's good. I think the other thing was just about the what our delegation is to make recommendations to strategic committees. So just in the back of what Lee's saying there, I know there's sort of actions been taken in terms of allocating money for additional street scene, which sits with communities, I think, and various other things about community safety officers, for example. So knowing how to continue to support that and monitor it, presumably that's kind of a recommendation to communities, which we'll be seeing as the reports come to us in due course.
Chair, I wonder if I could ask the director to respond to that through you. The director is present, but certainly this subcommittee reports direct back to the council, and in actual fact, a number of matters you'll be wanting to take back there. But I wonder if I could ask the director to give the appropriate assurance, please.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, Richard?
Thank you, Leader. My apologies. Here's Derek on the screen, Leader, in terms of communities.
Sorry, Derek. I thought you were referring to Richard. Go on, Derek.
No, apologies. The first time I've lost connection for a second there. So can I just be clear of the question? Thank you, Leader.
Okay.
Shall I run it by you again?
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's actually two still left outstanding, one related to Forest and Land Rangers, and if we need to bid into that, and if we will have sight of that through the Outdoor Access Forum. And the second one was just to do with the delegation that we've just agreed in the last item, was that what we do is we make recommendations as required through our planning structures and to the strategic committees to lead on a council-wide approach. So part of that, what I'm hearing from Lee's update, is that we sort of started doing that in the sense that we've already indicated and provided support for additional community safety wardens, for street scene, for all the things that have just been talked about. So it's really about getting that, closing the loop, if you like. You're tying all that up. So how are we going to see? Will we be seeing that routinely at committee, so we can stay on top of it in a sort of coordinated, coherent fashion?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. In terms of the Rangers, I'd have to give you a response out with the meeting, because that's a matter for economy and resources. However, in terms of all of the issues that you've discussed in terms of the restart, particularly the local infrastructure and the facilities, absolutely can't stress enough how welcome the additional money is from the council. But that will have to be seen in the context of the day job that continues to be done in looking after and working with communities. So I'd reassure all members that the way in which you will be advised of that, all 43, will be the next stage of this engagement, which will be community conversations in every ward across the region, where I would expect all members to be invited and part of those discussions to ensure that, in effect, there is as little gap as possible between between what we aspire to do as a council to bring back visitors and to maintain a safe and healthy and active community around all of those visitors from all the facilities of leisure, culture, museums, parks, open spaces, car parks. We are absolutely geared up to be ready to welcome visitors from within the region and out with, and elected members through the regular ward briefings and these community conversations will be at heart of these discussions in the coming weeks. And I'm quite confident that you'll play your part in these, and quite obviously there will be a more detailed report to the Communities Committee in June. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Derek. I'm going to take Councillor Scobie because he also had some questions on Brexit. Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair, and for your clarification that 3.9 will be taken later. I'm just looking at the EU and going along with what Stephen's saying in terms of 3.6.7, and that is EU funding and how it's being replaced. And there's a number of them there. There's the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We've got the UK Community Renewal Fund. We've got Shared Prosperity Fund at a later date, as it says here. Then we've got the Community Ownership Fund falling, and the Levelling Up Fund, where transport falls under. And it's really, and Derek referred there to gearing up for visitors. But I just wonder if we are geared up for all these funding resources or funding sources, and that we are maximising as much as possible. Hence my question at the beginning in terms of this committee's remit. And I heard Fiona saying that that would be finance and procurement, but have we got enough staff and are we properly geared up to maximise income from all these funds, so that, you know, what we used to get under EU funding, that we can still maximise these? That would be my first question on 3.67. And if you don't mind, if I return to my next question under 3.61, if I could get an answer to this one first, Chair.
Okay, I don't know whether Mark or
Chair, I would be very happy to respond to the matter. I mean, clearly we are in a position where new funding has been announced by the Chancellor. We will wish to take advantage of that funding. The Finance and Transformation and Procurement Committee last week determined that in respect of levelling up, we would move to phase 2. I had the opportunity, which I was grateful to discuss this with Councillor Scobie yesterday, and we will be seeking meetings with the parliamentarians on the Council's arrangements for that. And clearly, as I shared with Finance and Transformation and Procurement Committee, the opportunity has also been taken to work with neighbouring councils, particularly South Lanarkshire and Scottish Borders. In relation to the Community Renewal Fund, which is really the forerunner between Social Fund and Prosperity Fund to make sure nobody loses out, then we're just doing exactly that. And members will have noted that that fund and the availability of it and criteria was advertised at the beginning of the week. The Ownership Fund, we're awaiting further information on that one, Councillor Scobie and members, and when we get it, we'll make sure that that is appropriately targeted. That sits very well with the work and the intentions of our council in relation to asset management. In relation to, capacity to do all of this, then as you would expect, I have that very much in view, and we'll be making appropriate arrangements with the Council's resources to make sure we maximise this funding. Some of the funding streams themselves have money there that we can access that help develop the funding and the funding applications. But I will be reporting back to Finance and Transformation and Procurement on our progress in this regard. I trust that addresses the matters. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Fiona.
Yes.
You have further questions on
yes,
the...
and I'm pleased with the response that we got from Fiona there, and that she's on the ball, and that we can look for funding sources coming down to the region and however we use that. Could I just return to 3.6.1, and this is on the border control post, and I know in this paragraph or in that section under 3.6.1, it seems to have moved from a 9 kilometres to a 14 kilometre spread from the port of Cairnryan, or the ports of Cairnryan, which offers up more, if you like, available places for the border control point. Our favoured site was obviously the East Pier in Stranraer, so maybe if we could get some update on that, because it says here the Scottish Government are engaging with the Dumfries and Galloway Council and South of Scotland Enterprise Service to align the BCP and other local economic development activities within the area. I would hope that we are making a strong case for the East Pier as that border control point. It's ideal, it's custom made, it was part of the Stena port, so it's capable of taking any amount of heavy goods vehicles, and I would hope that we can focus the Scottish Government into some kind of response to our favoured site on this, because it'll not be too long, I think it's October, that the check-in comes in, and then further checks in January of 2022, and we've really got to get ready for it.
Mark?
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Scobie. In terms, I can give an update on some of those matters and just provide a bit of clarity on the 14 kilometres. The figure previously discussed was 9 miles, which is broadly equivalent to the 14 kilometres. It seems that Scottish Government have just changed their approach in terms of how they actually communicate that distance, and moving from using miles to kilometres, but they are broadly equivalent. So it was at 9 miles previously, but now they are utilising 14 kilometres. With regards to the stakeholder engagement and the ongoing discussions that we're having with Scottish Government, I can confirm earlier this week we were notified that Government have reduced a long list of 8 prospective sites down to 3. Those 3 sites will be taken to the Scottish Government Programme Board on Friday, and thereafter some engagement and communication with the local authority will take place, and they are looking to work with us to take forward a broader engagement programme, or for us to provide some advice and support with regard to a broader engagement programme with elected members and with the wider community, Councillor Scobie, with regards to the site options that are actually available to them. So as soon as we hear word, we will communicate that appropriately and ensure that process is kicked off.
Chair, could I ask through you if you're able to share with us what 3 are going forward?
Scottish Government have not shared what sites they are at this time. I think their preference was to discuss at Director General level and the Scottish Government at the Programme Board on Friday before there's any further communication with wider stakeholders.
Can you offer more information, Fiona? You're coming in there.
If that's okay with you, Chair, I was just going to express a word of caution here, because clearly as soon as sites are of interest, then they have a value, and we will need to observe confidentiality here at the point at which that information is shared with us. But rest assured, anything that we are able to share with members, and we don't have that information just now, then we will be able to share it. But I'm very aware that we're in public session just now, members. Thank you.
Thanks.
Always grateful for the information.
Thanks. I've got Councillor.
You cut out a little bit there, Leader, but I think you were about to say my name. It was just a quick question on 3.8.1, which is the first paragraph under renewal on page 12. And I'm just conscious that, you know...
Not on renewal yet. We're not actually onto that section yet.
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah. Forgive me, Leader. I think since 3 o'clock, I've kind of been jumping back and forward through the written report and the verbal report. So forgive me, I'll come back in later.
The next section, Richard will be taking us through the renewal and the recovery. So anybody else wanting any other questions on this section or the previous sections at all? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, in that case, I'll ask Richard to provide an update in terms of renewal activity and the initial approach to recovery, which is critical, of course, for our region and will require an important focus and more detailed future discussions for this subcommittee. And that is one of the reasons to support our strategic thinking that the next item on our agenda is a presentation from Fiona Lees in her capacity as a member of the Social Renewal Advisory Board. Richard.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, members, certainly for your input, your ideas and suggestions thus far on the agenda, and I'll certainly take on board Councillor Thompson's and other comments in terms of the way we present next time in terms of the key areas of the report. So we've heard members from colleagues today, and indeed you have received regular updates through reports to full council over the past 13 months in terms of response activity, how we've worked together with partners in order to react and respond to support our communities through the pandemic, and aligned with the Scottish Government route map and changing levels of restrictions, as Lee has indicated today, how we are restarting services. And what we mean by restarting services is very much recommencing activity largely in the same way as it was delivered pre-COVID. Because it's required from a legislative perspective to be done that way, or because there's an immediate customer, community and indeed member expectation that as soon as possible services can restart aligned with Scottish Government announcements. But in doing so, we've tried to be clear and engage with members that these services might not always be delivered in the same way, and that's because we want to take a different approach, as detailed in Appendix 1. In a number of the cases, our communities have told us that they've welcomed changes in which services have been delivered throughout the pandemic. In parallel, we've evidenced that we can deliver these services in a more efficient, effective and economic way, and by doing so, achieve our council's desired priorities and outcomes better. And finally, as a consequence of, I guess, the aforementioned, we can support and enhance transforming the way that we deliver services and create opportunities not only to improve those services, but to also create financial efficiencies that without doubt will be a requirement for us in the future and beyond. So what does service renewal look like, and what work has commenced thus far? The RRR team have been working very closely with corporate management team and with the senior leadership team, and we've started to evaluate service provision and identify renewal opportunities. We're holding evaluation sessions with each head of service and their management teams to review the service provision through a COVID lens, so to speak. And as detailed at 3.8.2 of the report, heads of service have produced renewal templates, and the RRR team are working very closely with colleagues in people and transformation to align this work with the previously agreed transformation programme, and to use this as a process to produce new, innovative, creative and different transformational opportunities for members to consider over the next 12 months in the run up to a new council. The Renew programme will feed into department service plans, service committee reporting and the established transformation programme and committee structure. And my intention will be to provide members of this committee with an update at each of our future meetings and seek your direction in terms of how we move forward and work across the council and with partners on opportunities to renew services in a different way, and having learned from the experiences that we've had over the past 14 months. In terms of recovery, the paper before members highlights a number of overarching principles in supporting recovery across Dumfries and Galloway, and poses some initial questions and observations to promote discussion. These are the same questions and observations that have been presented to CMT and SLT, and have started to focus minds in terms of the council's senior leadership team around the future post-COVID moving forward. To date, we've established recovery themes as detailed at 3.9.9 of the report, and members have been presented and agreed an economic recovery plan, an education recovery plan, and focusing on our work with the most vulnerable communities, social work services recovery plan. When we came out of lockdown just over a year ago, members, or just short of a year ago, we started work with the Community Planning Partnership in terms of an overarching recovery plan, and this was presented and adopted by the Community Planning Partnership Board at the time. It would be my suggestion that we now revisit and significantly refresh that document, and that should become the overarching multi-agency approach under which the aforementioned plans would sit and be delivered. A key area of focus and critical to our approach in terms of recovery moving forward will be, as mentioned by Derek earlier, the opportunity to listen to communities as to what their needs are and what recovery looks like for them. And as we now enter this period of reduced infection rates aligned with vaccination and community testing programmes, which allow for a certain level of optimism moving forward, we're really keen, following last night's initial engagement event, to commence the engagement with communities through the proposed community conversations approach, and to use this critical information to inform the way our council and our partners deliver services. So our communities have really come together, as members are aware, and we've been presented with those reports at full council. They've brigaded resource and operated in different ways to support one another, and our most vulnerable communities will need, without doubt, that ongoing support over the coming months and years. And I'm sure Fiona's presentation in a short while will provide further thinking and debate in that regard, aligned with the 3 identified themes and the 20 calls for action within the social renewal document. Again, in terms of this subcommittee, leader, I'd welcome the opportunity to present details at future meetings of the information we gather from communities, and to seek member direction in terms of using this information to inform service change and improvements, and make recommendations to those service committees as we've agreed and as Councillor Thompson mentioned earlier. So happy to pause there, leader, and take questions, comments, both in terms of the renewal activity and indeed the wider approach to recovery, before, with your blessing and Fiona's support, inviting her to make her presentation. Thank you, leader.
Thanks, Richard. I had Stephen Thompson and Willie Scobie both had questions already on this section, so I'll call Stephen first and then Willie.
Thanks, leader, and thanks, Richard. And I was pleased to hear you talk about the transformation programme, because that was really what my question related to. It's not alluded to so much in the report in writing itself, but that's what I would expect to sort of see, because obviously where we're at now supersedes our good intentions from yesteryear, you know. So I think we have to kind of accept that transformation programme has maybe done what it can, and we have to completely refresh, as you're suggesting. So I think I'd welcome how we can bring the real world into our previous programme and see the details of that later, because obviously it's got cross-cutting effects for the whole of the council, and while it could actually make us much more resilient and responsive, I think I'd welcome seeing that. And if we can maybe officially close or rebadge the transformation programme to sort of reflect where we're at now, which is a completely different world from a year ago. So yeah, welcome that, Richard. Thank you.
Right. I didn't actually take that from what you were saying. I didn't think we were going to ditch the transformation programme, rather that the transformation programme would be influenced by what we had learned through COVID.
Through your leader, if I may, and again to give some assurances to members, myself and Mike Shepley and our respective teams are working really closely. Mike and I, supported by colleagues, are reviewing, my apologies, where we are with transformation, and again using this as a process to move us forward and to be able to identify new opportunities through that COVID lens to really build on the programme, whether we call it transformation or recovery. I think, you know, the opportunity to present members with a range of different options in terms of moving forward will not only improve service delivery but create efficiencies is exactly where we need to work together to achieve.
Stephen, got any further question?
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm not precious about what it's called, really. It's just I think that the work stream clearly has to morph into what it needs to be now, and I think whatever it's called doesn't really matter. It's what the essence of it is. So that's fine. Thank you.
Thanks, Willie.
Thanks, Elaine. Really, there's a common thread running through the renewal, the restart, the recovery, and I can address the question I had under 3.9.2, under 3.8.2. It's really pertinent to both, and it's looking at as we restart, we reopen. I would assume, Richard, or presume that we're talking about village halls as well, and it's really my role as a councillor that I'm focusing my attention on just now, because as the village halls open up, I would presume community councils may start to meet again, keeping to the whatever restrictions are on there, and that would give elected members, councillors, the opportunity to attend in person. Likewise, for my ability to carry out my role as a councillor in terms of my weekly surgeries and getting about the ward with the community halls open, there will be a place for me to do that in terms of carrying out my weekly surgeries. Because up to now, if I go back to community councils, I've been disenfranchised because community councils, by their choice, have chosen to meet by Zoom, which our council doesn't recognise, and there's been no way, and I've continually asked how we can get into Zoom, and there has never been an answer back. So I would hope that the community councils, by their choice, could maybe start meeting in person and members could start to attend again. And similarly, with our own committee meetings, full council meetings, as to when we are able to start opening up again and meeting in person. We did it last year under certain guidelines, and I would hope that we would do that very soon, following the guidelines. So it's really just to get some sort of indication as to where we're at on all those aspects.
There's a comment there from Nick that Zoom is actually available on councillors' mobiles. In fact, I attend my community council by using the iPad. So if you get an iPad, you can put Zoom on iPad as well.
I understood, Chair, that Zoom was not secure, and that's why we couldn't do it. That the mobiles didn't accept it because it could not. There was no security on it or something. So maybe we need further advice on that one, Chair. But that was my understanding.
Yeah, I think it wasn't recommended originally, but you can use it on both iPhone and Zoom. Sorry, about both iPhone and iPad to actually use them, but. Nick,
it would have been good to have given that information being fed to us, Chair, because that was my assumption, and that's what I've been doing all throughout. So this is news from today.
Okay, Nick, do you want to go in?
Just if I can help slightly, lady. Yes, I think it has been a change in picture in relation to Zoom, but councillors' mobiles, the setup for councillors is different to that from officers. Councillors' mobiles and iPads, you are able to download the Zoom app from the App Store because those devices are not connected to the network in the same way as officers are. So the risks in terms of to the council network is not present on the councillors' mobiles and iPads. It's not available on Windows devices such as laptops and tablets, etc., but on the Apple devices it is.
some, yeah, there were some other points that Councillor Scobie was making about the use of council halls and so on. So I wonder if we could have some advice on that.
Certainly, Leader, through yourself. Obviously, I've had some discussion with a number of members in this regard. Our advice to management committees, where it's appropriate and where they operate council halls in partnership with the council and/or where we operate those facilities directly, very much aligns with Scottish Government guidance. That does not yet allow for in-person meetings. The advice from Scottish Government very much aligns with the return to office accommodation in that regard, which is currently from the end of June as we move into level 0. But as and when things change and/or are brought forward as a consequence of the data available to Scottish Government, we'll obviously work with all partners and inform members in terms of how we move forward.
Chair, I don't know if that actually helps. You know, does that mean that from, you know, as things start to open up on the 26th, because I would be hoping to start my weekly surgeries, so, you know, I am getting about, will there be facilities for me to be able to do that? Because it's quite a big, you know, I go out into the hinterland to hold my surgeries. Could I get some support, guidance on that?
Chair, it's Fiona Lees again. Would it be helpful just to come in? I'd be very happy to take this discussion offline with Councillor Scobie in particular, but clearly to issue advice to elected members. This council, along with every other council, wishes to follow the Scottish Government's advice on this. And the advice on, you know, working from home at this stage, even going back into level 3, is very clear. So we would be wanting to facilitate elected members to undertake their important constituency work. Overarching, then I would be anticipating bringing forward a report to the council on all of these matters on the 24th of June. Happy to take it offline with Councillor Scobie and discuss it with other members as appropriate, Chair.
Thanks, Fiona. I think it would be useful to have advice, because I think it is. I was uncertain, for example, when we would be able to restart our hybrid meetings instead of having the meetings completely remotely. But I understand that most local authorities are taking the advice as meaning that they wouldn't be able to do that until after the summer recess. But Richard.
That's very much the case, and clearly we'll be wanting to liaise with COSLA as well, Chair, on this matter.
Yeah, thanks. I don't see anybody else wishing to ask any further questions in this section. So, as I think we have noted the ongoing activity in response and restart, and we've had a discussion around the proposed approach to renewal and recovery, are we content to agree to receive a presentation from Fiona on the findings of the Social Renewal Advisory Board? Is that people happy to progress to that? Nobody's indicating otherwise. So Fiona, can we hand over to you, please?
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and a formal good afternoon to you. I'd like to just say a few words to address you, and then Lara is going to assist me with a presentation I have prepared. When I accepted your very kind invitation to come down here as a guest and to do a presentation, I was obviously in retirement. And I never thought for 1 minute I would be here as your interim chief executive. So I do want to take the opportunity to share with you the work of the Social Renewal Advisory Board, to talk about what I think it means for local government. And clearly now, as your interim chief executive, I want to talk about what I think it means for us here in Dumfries and Galloway. So the global pandemic, COVID, you know, has been indeed global, but everything about it, members, has been local, both in terms of its impact and our community response. It is a pandemic that has laid bare the inequalities we know exist in our communities, and it has cast a blight over the lives of far too many. So people from disabled people, ethnic minority communities, young people, old people and women have all been disproportionately affected by COVID, along with those on low incomes. The Social Renewal Advisory Board was set up by the Scottish Government last summer, and it was set up to address those inequalities which have been all too apparent, but to build on the social action which we've also seen in all of our communities. We've been humbled and we've been inspired by stories of kindness, compassion and great courage, and in the worst of times we've really seen the best of humanity. And in response to the pandemic, then what we want to do is, bring forward transformational ideas that will allow us to deliver real change as we embark on a journey of renewal. And it is incredibly prescient that, you are doing this today. The report that has been produced, that was published towards the end of January, is not a things to do list, and it is certainly not a list of things that will be done to others. And that's why, instead of recommendations, it is in fact calls to action, because it recognises all need to act. Now, clearly, working for a statutory partner, a council and others, we work in a public sector where we have duties and we have obligations to fulfil and for which we are clearly accountable. But the renewal that we need to see involves working closer than ever with our communities, and that's particularly communities of place, because people need to have more say, they need to have more power, and they need to have more influence if renewal is going to be sustainable and effective and yield the results that we want to see. So this isn't just about what we do, it's about how we do it. So Lara, I'm now going to turn to the presentation, and if you could please assist me, that would be great. If you could put the slides up, please. So thank you very much. So next slide, please, Lara. So members, this just rehearses, this was the purpose of the board. Short-term group, come up with transformational ideas. Let's see what real change needs to look at in a fairer Scotland out of our journey for renewal after the pandemic. Thank you, Lara. The next tells you a little bit about the process, members, that was undertaken. The board met frequently between June and January. It was helped by 9 policy groups, which were drawn from a wide range of groups right across Scotland. With significant public engagement activity. I represented Solace in the group, so I represented all colleague chief executives, and Alison Evison, the president of COSLA, represented all councils. Remaining representatives were from third sector and national organisations. Mindful of the work that was being done in communities, I was particularly keen that their voices were heard. And I had the pleasure of organising, as it happened, 31 local listening events, so we could hear people's stories, hear what had worked for them and what hadn't worked for them, and hear what a good life would look like out of the pandemic. I was delighted that the first of those events, members, was actually here in Dumfries last August, and I was able to join that, albeit virtually. We heard from the 4 Poverty Truth Commissions, which have been established across Scotland's communities, and a number of focus groups as well, with a particular look at equality issues. A call to evidence yielded over 100 responses. So there was a wealth of evidence and experience upon which to draw, members. So if we can move to the calls to action, then they could really be grouped within 3 themes, and there are 20 all told. I'm now just going to go through these fairly quickly. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, I mean, a number of these, members, you will recognise. A minimum income guarantee. Much has been done round about universal income in Scotland. This is going to be a long-term aim. This is a slow burn, and it is clearly one for a new government, and indeed close work with the UK government as well. The next one is about, anti-poverty work. We are seeing, sorry, can you just go back? I'm just going to go through each of these points in turn, Lara. Thanks very much. So the second point is really about anti-poverty work, as we have seen the impact that job loss, furloughing, has had on people and increased debt. And this is something that you will be wanting us to have a close look at, members, to make sure that the very best of advice is being given to people and that our services and our partners are working as one. More work to be done round about fair work and how we can make that conditional, an aspect of conditionality round about government funding. And clearly this work coincided with the Higgins report as well, which was about looking at a well-being economy. A focus on fair work actions just now. A number of people, because they're not in fair work, have been, disproportionately impacted because of the pandemic, because they've had to work. Clear recommendations round about here for, an extension to free early learning, an extension beyond 1140, and indeed care for those who require it. You'll see, members, from this first slide that a number of these recommendations and calls to action fall into different categories. There are things that we can do now. There are things that we as local government with COSLA would wish to lobby on with government, and there are things for the Scottish Government that we would be wanting to work with them on as well. Next slide, Lara. Thank you. Housing features significantly in this report, members, at a time when staying at home and having a secure home and where you can be warm and comfortable and feel safe has never been more important. And this report coincided with the publication of Housing 2040, which was just a couple of weeks ago. So much for us to do in our strategic role here. I think you, like the rest of Scotland, members, will have been shocked the extent to which we have experienced food insecurity and hunger within our communities. And I know very well the very excellent work that your services have been doing along with the third sector over the pandemic. We need to make sure that people don't go hungry. And one of the things I'll be very keen to do in working with colleagues when I'm here is see how we can deliver food with dignity and really maximise the work the council does, making food accessible through our school meals service and in our communities through family support as well. This report calls for an end to digital exclusion in the next parliamentary term. I will want to have a very close look to see what does that mean for Dumfries and Galloway, and what do we consider that gap to be, and how is that gap going to be closed. There's an interesting set of recommendations round about universal basic services, effectively extending concession. So the kind of support that people need to a roof over their head, to heat and light, and to being able to care for themselves and to feed themselves, then that is indeed covered by a universal basic service. Again, much more to be done there, and this is clearly something that will be in the scope for a new government. Human rights underpins almost every recommendation here, members, and this report coincided with the publication of the work of the National Task Force on Human Rights, which contains some 30 recommendations. So one of the things that we've got to do and do through COSLA is to make sure there's a really clear line of sight as to what needs to be done, and more importantly, who's doing it and how we will know they've done it. And I'll be wanting to put in place arrangements so that that clear line of sight and reporting is available to elected members. So if you could take me to the next slide, Lara. Again, human rights, disabled people have been particularly impacted by COVID, by the impact of shielding. And I know as I say that, you will all be thinking of people in your wards and perhaps your families too. It was certainly a feature, as I recall, the listening event I attended here in Dumfries and Galloway in August of last year. We want to build inclusive communication. Of course we do. We want to be clear in all of our dealings and inclusive. COSLA would be the first to point out there's a cost implication there, and they have in fact done that in their response to this, the publication of the report. Sadly, we have seen incidents of hate crime within our communities and public sexual harassment, and neither have any home here. And obviously we would be wanting to look at strengthening measures wherever possible to enable us to deal with that. And for many people who have made Scotland their home, which we welcome, we want to make sure that the rights and entitlements that are available to all of our citizens are available to those who've made Scotland their home. Next slide, please. So the next 4 recommendations are really ones for us now. And that's to begin to think about how can we further shift the balance of power so that individuals and communities have much more control and influence and say over the decisions that affect their lives. We know that we have improved service delivery over the course of the pandemic. There's some things we have done very, very well that in ordinary times it would have taken us months, if not years, to do. And that's what we need to capitalise on in relation to our transformation. And I was very heartened to hear the exchange members earlier between transformation and restart and recovery. Our communities don't care what it's called. They want to see change and improvement. And one of the things I'll be doing very soon in my period with you is looking back over the progress we've made in transformation, what still is relevant and current after the pandemic, what has been overtaken, and how are we going to secure the kind of change that we need to see and our communities expect here in Dumfries and Galloway. So we want to build in ways that have worked well. What hasn't served us well during the pandemic, then we shouldn't do that in the future because it just wasn't there when our communities needed it. And we need to focus on all of our activities being much more resilient as we move forward. There is a focus on, empowering communities, and we also need to empower our teams here as well, members, and make sure they feel confident to take the kind of decisions and reflect the can-do approach that you want to have in communities towards the kind of results communities want to see and the quality of life they want to see here in Dumfries and Galloway. Next slide, please. So the final recommendation is, the most important one. And for those who have served councils for a long time and served communities for a long time as elected members, we've seen reports like this before. And what we need to do is to close the gap between what we're promising to do and the practice people living in our communities see day in and day out. Good ideas and laws alone won't change. What we need to do is to build the kind of relationships we need to see with our communities so that change is having an impact, it's receiving the beneficial impact we want to see, and indeed it is sustainable. So these are just some of the things that I know you will want to have in our sights, and these are reflected in the report as we move forward. So climate change, our child poverty is sitting around 26% just now. Human rights has to underpin everything. I was delighted to see you'd considered your update on equalities outcomes just a few weeks ago at your council. We need a refocus in place. Communities have never been more important, and places where people's hearts are. And in all of this, we need to measure progress. And it is interesting, members, this is coming 10 years after Christie. And I would be wanting to give some public recognition to that in June, which is the anniversary of the publication of the Christie report, because this council will live Christie every day, and it's very important our communities see that. So I'm now going to go on and just share with you what different people have said about the report. So next slide, please. So the Scottish Government, and members, this was an issue around about timing. This came very close to the notice of election period. So clearly the government welcomed the ambitious and innovative calls to action. In fact, the First Minister in her daily briefing on the date of the publication particularly recognised this report. But all have said this is a step change rather than immediate action, and they have recognised that this will be something for the new government. So that means, members, this is very timely when we're considering this, because this will help us through our work with COSLA and our work with government to be very clear in what we expect to be doing ourselves, that is our legitimate role as local government, and what we expect of others. Next slide, please. COSLA overwhelmingly welcomed this report. You know, they recognised that it demonstrated a shared hope of us working together for a fairer, more equal Scotland. They also recognised that a lot of the work that's referenced in this report is actually underway. And that will be an issue for us members too, which I'll address in my final comments to you. As indicated, you know, COSLA helpfully make distinctions between the calls to action. Some are for us now, others are for us to lobby on, to get action, and others are clearly the responsibility of Scottish Government, and indeed there are some that are the responsibility of the UK Government as well. But we're not going to wait on other people. I think there are things we need to think about now. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So one of the first things, you know, that strikes me from this report is, at a time when our country has been told to stay at home, local communities have never been more important. And there is no organisation closer to local communities than local councils. We may not have all of the answers to the challenges our communities face, members, but we are, through your good selves, the only elected representatives locally of place. So we need to stay close to our communities, and we've never been closer than during the pandemic, and we need them to be at the heart of everything we do. So when we hear from communities, and we've drawn on, just in the currency of this meeting, you know, last night's event, then we need to listen hard, and we need to let our actions do the talking. And those conversations need to be continuous, because this is about building relationships with communities, which you clearly have, which have served us so well during the pandemic. Next slide, please. We need to respond quickly as we come out of lockdown. Clearly, you know, there are hidden harms of COVID, members. Some are only too apparent to us in our main streets and our town centres, and when we hear about the impact COVID has had on families. Those hidden harms are not going to be hidden anymore. We're going to start to see them as our communities reopen and start to reconnect. So we will want to respond quickly to need, and we will want to help build the social and economic vitality of our communities, and do that to support recovery. We will need to prioritise what we do, and it will be important that we do the things that matter most to our communities, and that we know that that is having the intended impact that we want to see, members. Next slide, please. So we're going to have to strike a really fine balance, members, between meeting immediate needs, and much of the funding which the government has made available, and particularly towards the end of the financial year, is non-recurring funding. Now, you know that that's funding we can only spend once. So we need to know that we're making the very best choices about how we spend that money, and we need to know that we are also not creating legacy issues for us in the future in terms of that funding. So we need to know what impact the funding is going to have. And we need to know as well that when we spend, we're going to achieve the change that we want to see. And when we spend, we want to know that we spend well too. And that's why our work on procurement, good procurement, and value for money is so important. And if we're really clever, members, then we also want to look at how we can lock in spend and build community wealth, which I think is such a key part of our work as we go forward, particularly with borderlands. And that's why, members, just referencing my earlier point round about sustainability and round about renewal and transformation, we need to build a sustainable future for our council and a sustainable future for our community. And we need a clear line of sight between our plans and our ambitions and our investment. Next slide, please. So a particular challenge for us here is that our plans have served us very well here, members. I can see that. I do reflect, and I have only been with you for a couple of weeks, but I do think we've too many plans. And I actually think we should take the time in the reviews that lie ahead of us, and they are scheduled as we move towards 2022, when you agreed that your council plan and your community plan would be reviewed. I do think we should take the opportunity to streamline our arrangements. We have one Dumfries and Galloway, and we should have one plan. And that makes life very simple for everybody who works here and for people who live here as well. And it would be my intention that officers would be working hard over the next year to respond to the needs of our community, to be doing that in a sustainable way, but also to be beginning to work on proposals which you would wish to see laid before a new council. Next slide. And that really links nicely with a comment round about partnerships, because our partnerships have been vital here. We serve our communities together, and our partnerships move at the speed of trust. And in very many cases, you have been able to move really quickly with your partners here beside you. And we want to build on that. So our plans for the future need to be our partners' plans as well. And our investment for the future needs to take account of the investment they are making, so that our communities get the very best from the public pound that's here in Dumfries and Galloway. It is an enormous strength, members, to have one Dumfries and Galloway and you all share your boundaries. I've looked down jealously from Ayrshire for many years, and maybe one for the future is to think about how we can maximise the governance arrangements so that there is the greatest opportunity for democratic influence and indeed accountability for public services here in Dumfries and Galloway. Final slide, I think. Yes. So that really takes me very nicely to leadership, because this is a time for leadership. You are the only democratically elected local representatives for Dumfries and Galloway. Everything about this pandemic has been local. Local government is indeed local leadership. And if anyone needs convinced of that, then they simply should go and look at the 2003 Local Government Act, because that vests that power with you. So I would be wanting to be working very closely with you members, with the officer team, to ensure that we have that clear line of sight, that simplification, and that people see in public services here in Dumfries and Galloway that we share their ambitions and that our delivery plans are indeed achievable and that they are having the desired impact I know you all want to see. So in rounding off, and I'll just let you put the slides down just now, Lara. In rounding off, members, this is not a race back to normal. This is a time for change. And those who we serve, and indeed have served us during this pandemic, expect that. And my view is they should receive no less. Members, I am very happy to take questions on the presentation. I'm looking forward to hearing your views, and it would be my intention that subject to your views this afternoon, then, Chair, we would bring back a report on the outcome of this presentation, because you're not going to make decisions based on a presentation, but we would bring back a report to this subcommittee which would allow you to consider matters properly and further in relation to our Council's proposals. Many thanks, members.
Thanks, Fiona. Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Leader, for letting me in. Fiona, thanks very much. That was really interesting. Jaw-dropping at some stages as well. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, because of your experience here, picking up your closing comment is, I suppose I would try to draw out of you here what you consider the link is between the transformation processes and recovery processes. You know, how they go hand in hand, or do you think they go hand in hand, or am I mistaken in that?
So, Chair, are you happy for me to pick up? So it's a really straight answer. I actually don't think there's any difference, and importantly, I don't think that our communities think there's any difference. And what we need is a change programme that is going to allow us to pick up on the things that have worked well for our council, our partners and our communities over COVID, and the outcomes and ambitions that we have along with our communities for the future. So we need one programme that is going to get us there, and that's a programme that also needs to deliver a sustainable council, because we do have challenges ahead. And whilst in the course of service committees, you will be hearing about, funding that is available for COVID, you can only spend that once. So we need to spend that wisely. So this is a council that does need to change, and I believe it needs one change programme in support of that.
Just can I quickly come back, Elaine? The only, it's no criticism, the only thing I'm going to say is I totally accept the bit about child poverty. Everybody does. We had a CPAC down here, did a significant piece of work a few years ago, but we've got significant numbers of older people in this region. And Joseph Foundry Foundation has just put something out just a few weeks ago saying across the UK that the poverty amongst pensioners, particularly those in rented accommodation, is on the rise, just as the same as with child poverty. So I think we need to focus on poverty, but make sure that we cover everybody. I think it's the only comment I'd make on that whole presentation where I wouldn't say I don't agree with it, that's the wrong words, but I think maybe we need to add in there the poverty as it surrounds older people in particular. Thanks very much, Fiona.
Chair, I would just wish to give an assurance that that would clearly be in our sights. Poverty's got no place in our communities, and particularly hidden poverty, where many are too proud to say, and that's particularly the case for our older people. So rest assured, Councillor Ferguson, that would be in our sights.
Thanks, Rob Davison.
Thanks, Elaine. Fiona, thank you for the presentation. I think it's really helpful and really thought-provoking. I'm conscious that many people are counting the hours, I think, until some things go back to normal, I suppose, for want of a better phrase. It will have been months on end since they were able to hug loved ones that happen to live in different parts of Scotland, for example. About 16 months in my case, but that's an aside. I'm also very aware that there is a school of thought, which I very much subscribe to, that there is plenty of what was normal that wasn't actually working particularly well in the first place. And that if there is any benefit to be had from the experience of COVID, it's not going back to those bits of normal that actually were long overdue some serious attention and fixing in the first place. And with that in mind, it was your comment about the benefits of an authority with coterminous boundaries that I was particularly interested in. My own view is that while we're very fortunate in having that simplicity, I'm not myself yet sure that we've fully exploited the advantages of it that it should give us. Now, that's partly down to us. Of course it is. It's down to us as a council, and particularly as elected members. But of course, it's a partnership, so it's also a question of our partners as well. My own view is that I think that this piece of work, whether it be the social and economic recovery that was outlined in page 13 of the reports, or the much broader and longer term recommendations in the Social Renewal Advisory Board, those are going to be the key pieces of work for us to do, not just between now and the election next year, but probably for the following council term thereafter. Although I think it would be foolish for us to think too far ahead, given that the virus has, at least in the past, been in the habit of delivering us some unexpected twists and turns. But given that, we can at least assume that this ought to be a major focus of our work, probably for years to come. I wonder if you've any kind of initial thoughts, I guess particularly from your specific perspective, about how we maximise the benefit that we could get from community planning, and that kind of cross partners approach to this area of work, because it strikes me that this will not be achieved by local authorities alone. We've got to have buy-in from all of those community planning partners in order to really have the best effect. Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks, Rob. Fiona.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Davidson. So I think to deal with the first part of your question, round about what's worked well and, what do we leave behind and what do we want to change, then there's a lot of talk about that. There's a lot of talk about that across Scotland. And what we need to do is to press ourselves and each other so that we actually come back with specifics and we start to talk about what are the things we really want to focus on. And if you're so minded, members, that is indeed the territory I would like to get into with the team. These are the discussions we need to have, and I would hope that we could reflect that in any back paper to you. Councillor Davidson, on the matter of partnerships, then, I haven't had the opportunity to go to your community planning partnership yet, but I have been at the Resilience Partnership, and tomorrow I'll be at your Public Protection Partnership as well. So I think you have got very, very good working relationships. I think they have served. I think they've served us well. And I think what we now need to do is take that a stage further. So what I would be looking for, and I cannot imagine how we would be far apart, is that, the ambitions our communities have for Dumfries and Galloway are in fact, reflected in the plans of our partners. And I think we should be aiming to have, a community plan that we can all unite behind. And that is in fact one Dumfries and Galloway, one plan. And that's reflected in our spending proposals as well, both in terms of the way we deliver our services and the way we invest in the future in terms of capital too. And, I do know that is within the art of the possible, and within the time that I'm with you, I would want to work as hard as I can to support you in any way there.
Thanks. Do you want to come back, Rob?
Well, simply to say, I think that's very helpful indeed, and I certainly think that this is an area of activity we will want to have firmly on the agenda for future meetings of the subcommittee. I think that, certainly to me, Chair, makes a great deal of sense, and very much appreciate the response.
And Willie had a question.
Thanks, Elaine. No, highly impressed by the presentation, Fiona, and really there's a lot to take in all that you said throughout those slides. So it's hard to keep it in your head or your mind, just exactly what did you say. But I did focus, and I relish the the meeting with you in terms of me getting out to serve the communities, because you did say stay close to your communities. And I often feel that we're working, we too often, it feels like we're working against the communities, the very people that elect me. And I like to think I have a reputation of representing the people within the ward, and maybe that's why I continue to get, or have been returned. But there's so many facets that make up the plan. And Andy just touched on one, and he talked about older people's poverty. Well, we've equally got child poverty, where it's on the increase rather than reducing from 1 in every 4 children. We're on the increase, and Andy and I has had this discussion in the anti-poverty working group, and it's how do we reduce the poverty that children are facing, but equally then it's families that are facing. So we've got a massive task. And from your presentation, and just to touch on it, and I think you touched on it as well, many of these older people can be asset rich and cash poor. And they face fuel poverty, all types of poverty. They're living in a house that they can't maintain, yet they don't qualify for many of the benefits. So there's a massive task. And what interests me in your presentation is how do we get down to that one plan across the region, recognising that we are the only legitimate body or elected body. The rest are made up in all different kinds of ways, but we are the only elected one. So it's how do we represent the people, represent the communities that elected us, staying with this idea that stay close to your communities and deliver the services that they want and expect from us. And I would be interested to see that one plan that you have in mind and what may come out of your presentation. Not so much a question, more to see what is going to come out with this one plan.
I think through you, Chair, there's actually 6 questions there, so thank you very much, Councillor Scobie. Maybe just a response to some of those things. I think the first thing in relation to older people is that they are themselves assets, and our communities are better for them. And there is so much that they have to contribute and we have to learn. And a lot of that's happened during COVID in the way that people who've been shielded have been supported, and particularly, you know, the way our schools have supported wider communities as well. So I would certainly want to look at how we can, you know, harness and work with all groups across our community. Clearly, you know, we're talking about, I mean, I know I've got 146 polling places members, so you know we've got about 160 different communities, and all of those communities will have their thoughts about how their communities could be better and what they love about their communities and what they want to see improved. And you are blessed with a ward structure here that I think is the envy of many in Scotland, and it is a structure that you have supported with officers. So we are in a position where I think you'll be able to take a great deal of assurance round about local needs and local circumstances, because as well as scale makes you strong, your diversity makes you strong as well. And, you know, we have got effectively urban communities and very rural communities as well. And we will want to make sure everybody's voice is heard. And then we, you know, all of that is drawn together in a wide strategic plan, and it has to be strategic, members. And we simply have to discipline ourselves. When people ask us for a plan, we have to point to our community plan and we have to say, well, it'll be there. And, you know, members, if it's not there, then we'll put it there. So, you know, it's quite a discipline for us as well. And maybe on that point, just about the role of elected members, because, you know, I've worked for councils absolutely by choice for 43 years, and I absolutely respect the role local members have. But relationships with communities, the test of our relationships is the difficult times, not the easy times. And just because we have difficult things to say doesn't mean we become difficult ourselves. And the relationships that we have with our communities will be the strength and will be the testament of that. And I'm very confident in the work I've seen already and what I know about Dumfries and Galloway, because I do come from the area, then in actual fact, you're building on some very strong foundations. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Willie, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, I'm sure we will develop what Fiona has presented to us. But one of the things that I picked up just on her some of her last remarks was this idea, you know, that we are unique and we've got our ward structures, but we equally need those ward structures needs to be serviced by appropriate level of officers and so forth, and it's maybe something that we need to focus on. That not all the director are located in Dumfries, and that we at least have somebody locally, you know, because it's a 75-mile stretch, and I know you were doing it at Dromore yesterday. It's even further away from Dumfries, and they feel quite isolated at times that too much is going over there and it's not happening here. So we need to have a solid structure that supports the ward structure, and not left to one officer to do all this massive work. So it's interesting what you've presented, Fiona, that's all I'll say.
Thanks. I don't see anybody else asking to speak, so there's just three issues, I suppose, that I would like to raise. The first one is that in terms of taking this forward, I would be quite interested in examples of what this could mean within a local government context. So maybe something a bit more specific about what would be an example of a council, you know, responding to this call to action. The second point, I suppose, is that sorry, my phone's going off. There will be financial consequences of this. You know that you know some of these things are like a minimum basic income and basic services and so on. There will be a financial consequence for government, not necessarily for local government. And I just wondered what sort of thought has been given to how that would be funded, because it often strikes me as a politician is that we're always very keen to say we would like to do X, Y, and Z, but we shy away from the financial consequences. So we don't actually tackle how we tax wealth, or whether in fact we should all pay a little bit more to get better services, because everybody feels that, you know, it becomes too unpopular to have that sort of conversation with the electorate. And my third point, I suppose, is slightly specific about call to action 14, which says strengthen measures to prevent and address hate crime and public sexual harassment. And I just wondered why it was public, whether that relates to some of the discussion around the hate crime bill about what goes on in private, whether you're criminalising people for something they've said in private, or why it specifically was public, because as I think probably every single woman knows, and quite a lot of men, is that sexual harassment is pretty nasty, whether it's public or private. So I just wondered why the emphasis on particularly on public, and whether that was responding to the hate crime discussions. Okay, thanks. Sorry, you're still muted.
Yeah, thank you. So sorry, Councillor Murray and members. Yes, I'll maybe just take the last one first, because it was a late addition in the work of the board, and it reflected much of the discussion that was taken place in society, and the position of women, and how they are made to feel in particular. So yes is the answer to that. In relation to what we need to do and a council response, I mean, I think what we would want to do as officers to take away this report and to set out what our possible response to this could be. Again, living within existing resources. You know, the cake is the cake hasn't got any bigger. And if we decide to do things, members, that have a revenue implication, then equally, as you rightly point to, Chair, then there is a corresponding decision round about what we're not going to do. But if we're genuinely going to respond to what we've learned over the last year and what our communities have experienced and what they're telling us, then we are going to have to change, but always in a sustainable way. And I think your final point, Chair, just round about the impact of this, you know, wider on the public purse, then you have put your finger on the very discussions that are taking place at COSLA and will be with the new government in taking forward this report. So, you know, that's about trying to get a bigger cake from the settlement. But my focus is the here and now. My focus is on responding and how we could respond and what the options might be available to members. And if members are content, we'll lay that out in a paper for your next meeting.
Thanks, Fiona. I think that, yeah, that we will all look forward to seeing that and discussing it further. Certainly, it's a very thought-provoking piece of work. I'm not seeing anybody else with questions still, so as there is no business deemed urgent due to the need for a decision today, that concludes our business for today. And can I thank everybody, members and officers, for their contributions to the discussion. Thank you.